Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show where we talk about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm your host, Reagan Kelly, and I am joined by all my awesome co-hosts, Laura J. Nash. How are you doing, Laura?
I'm doing fantastic. Love the shout out to the J.
It's, it's a good middle initial. I've got a J in my name too, but I won't specify where. Shane Kelly, how are you doing today, Shane?
J-rific.
And Nate Heininger. How are you doing, Nate?
Hold on just a second. Look introduction. Okay. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Help.
Yes. Help.
Help.
As implied, we are talking some more about IFComp, the Interactive Fiction Competition 2016. This is our second episode covering the games of IFComp 2016. Our last one was, when you're hearing this, probably the episode before last. We're going to be doing maybe as many as 3 or
100.
4, yes, several dozen of these between now and the conclusion of the competition. If you missed the last one, I'd recommend maybe listening to that one first. But to give a very brief recap, IFComp is a interactive fiction competition, interactive fiction being a really fancy name for text-based video games. And IFComp runs every year. This year there were 58 entries, awesome games created by independent game creators and submitted as brand new works for this competition. So there are 58 totally brand new games for your consideration. And we're going to be talking some more about some more of the games that we've tried in this year's IFComp and what our impressions were of them. If you want kind of a full picture, go back and listen to the previous episode. It would be the one before last in our feed. But we're going to go ahead and dive right into it.
I think it may be worth noting that we are not picking any of these games out of any sort of, preference. Really, the four of us are just selecting randomly, making sure that we have a spreadsheet to cover, who is talking about each game. We're just grabbing a few at random, playing them, and we're going to talk about them. So there's probably some great games that we haven't hit yet, but we are not doing this out of any sort of preferential treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there are, like I said, 58 games.
I kind of picked some that looked like they were going to be cool.
we picked out of hope. We didn't just
not totally random, right?
Yeah, we're playing the ones that jumped out at us. But we're not by any means saying that the ones that we're playing are the best games or the ones that you should definitely play. We're going to just sort of report back on what we've played so far and what we thought about it. And if you have games in IFComp this year that you've tried that we haven't talked about yet or that we don't talk about in this episode that you think we ought to check out, please let us know. We want to hear about those. So, with 58 games, we're not going to get to them all. We want to play as many of the best ones as possible. So if you have ones that you think are particularly interesting, let us know.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll go ahead and go first because I played the most games between our last episode and this one. And the first one that I was going to talk about was A Time for Tungsten by Devin Raposo. This was one that, so this is a Twine game, and I think we've explained what Twine is more than enough times on this show, but, sort of a choose-your-own-adventure style, but in this case it's fairly linear. A Time for Tungsten is very much more on the sort of fiction or like hypertext narrative side rather than being like a adventure-y game. The sort of brief pitch on the IFComp page is the walls are high, the hole is deep, she is trapped on a distant planet, watched, she may not survive, but she did live. And first thing I should say is this was probably the longest Twine game I've ever played at about 2 hours. I know there probably are Twine games that are more weighty than that, but like that's fairly long for one of these. And the way that IFComp judging works, 2 hours is kind of the cap. Games can be as long as they want, but you're supposed to judge them based on their first 2 hours. This came right up to that 2 hour mark for me. But I enjoyed every minute of that time. It's a story told in a very interesting kind of partly nonlinear, very interactive fiction-y way about someone trapped and presumably dying on what seems to be a distant planet. But it has a very odd prose style, and there's actually kind of an in-narrative explanation of that I won't spoil. It does a really good job of kind of merging its kind of unusual writing style and the fact that you're playing it in this sort of twine style with the narrative. Like there's a reason for all of the things that initially seem odd about the game. And I really thought this was like a tale well told. Like this was a good short story, solid writing, interesting enough to carry me through the full 2 hours of playing it. So I would say this was, in terms of just the twine games that I've played for IFComp, this is definitely one of the top. I haven't gotten to a point where I'm really considering like rankings yet or anything, but if you're looking for a long and involving short story told using twine, or any other point and click style of IF that is kind of a cool science fiction story, interesting characters, and one other thing that this game did really super well is sound. The game is fully there's full sound throughout. It does a good use of just sort of basic twine features for like text color and so on, but really where this really stood out was that it has sound throughout the entire game. There's a full soundtrack, lots of sound effects. So wear headphones when you play this. I think that the soundtrack is by the author himself, Devin Raposo, and he's doing a really good sort of imitation of David Byrne. So it's very.
That's all I need.
Yeah,
it's solid, and it uses a lot of like, I guess, open source, or not open source, like royalty free sound effects as well to kind of build a sound stage for it.
Wilhelm scream.
And interestingly enough, like it's the only twine game I've ever played that has load times, because it actually does all the loading at the beginning. It has a load time. When you click to start the game, if you're playing on the web, you can expect it to take about 1.5 minutes to start, because it has to download like 100 megabytes worth of MP3s in order to get started. But it's really involving because of that. Like the fact that I had headphones on and was playing with the sound up kind of helped me get into what, like, I'll be honest, my attention span isn't the best, and a 2-hour twine game is something that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to kind of get through. But the fact that it was good writing, good sound throughout, like, it really kept me going. So I definitely give this a thumbs up and a recommendation.
What's the atmosphere like?
Well, it kind of goes between. There's sort of two parallel stories of. I don't want to spoil too much of the story, but there's sort of two parallel stories of a recovery agent. I'm going to get the terms wrong, but it's basically kind of a space scrap miner who's the tale is told slightly out of sequence, but he or she, I'm not even sure which, is kind of possibly dying on a distant planet and kind of recounting the story of their life, and also some characters who seem to be kind of outside of that story looking in, kind of reading the details of this person's life retrospectively. And it switches back and forth between these two styles, and it has different sort of sound stages for both. So sometimes it feels very kind of sad or contemplative. Other times it feels very active. There's alarms going off. Lots of sound, lots of music. Just a good overall atmosphere.
It's interesting. I don't know if I'm the newest to interactive fiction of this group, but like, you talk a lot about the sound. I feel like I haven't run into very many games that incorporate music.
Yeah, it's pretty rare.
Crystal Warrior Kesha aside.
Yeah, I think it's most common in Twine games. I think the Twine tool has some built-in support for that, but yeah, you don't see a lot of I never seen parser-based IF that had a soundtrack.
I'm not even sure that that Inform supports it.
Yeah, I don't think
it's
it does.
tricky because it's reading, and so reading is a particular type of focus that might be different than walking, hacking, slashing, in a video game, and also like the timing of things.
Yeah. Well, the timing,
People read
most
at
of this is
different
about
levels.
setting a stage. So like, you'd have background music that was mostly like, music for airports, the kind of that style. But also sometimes, you'd be there's a lot of scenes that take place at the sort of bottom of a hole, as mentioned in the little blurb I mentioned there. And, you hear the world outside that hole, you hear nature sounds. And so there's, it's mostly just sort of about setting stages.
Yeah, I played The Mouse, and one of the interesting things about that was that the main character, a lot of the personality of that character was based on like love of music, and so you're hearing music, and there's moments where the character just sort of puts in headphones and has a reverie of the music she's listening to. So that could really work for this kind of thing.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about The Mouse?
Sure. Well, The Mouse is another Twine game by Norbs or Norbez. Norbies.
Norbez.
Yeah, Norbez. And it has some pretty heavy subject matter. The overall story is one about just sort of an abusive relationship between two college roommates. And so it was definitely an interesting one. This is one of those ones where I just sort of spun the dice. You don't spin dice. I rolled the dice by hitting the randomize button, and I picked the first thing on the list. And it's again with the heavy subject matter. It has some challenges. I felt like for me as a reader, the biggest one was that although it has some interesting things to say. It starts off with it really front loads a lot of reading before any kind of interactivity or choice. And maybe that's a personal taste issue. But when it comes to interactive fiction, if like I spend more time right up front just reading than I do, feeling like I have a say in the story, then that's kind of an issue for me. I don't know if maybe that's a stylistic thing. The main character in this, which I thought was the most interesting part of the writing, or most realistic, was a young girl who's college age kind of punk rock girl who in a lot of ways is sort of paralyzed by indecision. And I played through the whole thing twice. And in the first time, the main choices that you get as a player revolve around kind of whether or not you'll reach out to friends or to a specific friend about the fact that she's being abused. And so I tried playing this in a couple of different ways. And in the playthrough where I felt like I actually really had control of the narrative was the one where you do go ahead and reach out to those people. But in the second playthrough, I tried to play it in such a way that I was going to try to avoid the abuse, but it did not work. The main character really kind of feels trapped, and then you as the player kind of go along. So all in all, I thought it was interesting. One of the neatest things about it is it's very fully illustrated. There's lots of pictures, so that's something for it, and also the use of music I thought was really nice. The things I would say were maybe areas for improvement on this. The supporting cast of characters I didn't feel like was particularly nuanced. The main character, especially in contrast to the main character, who thought very very much was. Everyone else kind of seems to exist to either just sort of be a shithead or push the main character towards or away from the shithead. So all in all, I thought it was an interesting read. Maybe not something that I would put high on my recommendations list, but it's definitely a unique, interesting entry.
I didn't play anything nearly as heavy. So I guess I can awkwardly transition into a conspiracy shoe-oriented story. Awkwardly.
I really want to play this one. I'm glad you played it.
Yeah, I played a game called The Shoe Department, and it's by Aquanet. And it's also a Twine game, and it is a conspiracy, mind control, teenage job suck game. Basically, you play a teenager who has to get their first job. His parents work in the Defense Department. They force him to get a summer job. And you start off just clocking in at this terrifyingly large labyrinth. Let me take that.
Labyrinth. Yeah.
I was trying to say labyrinthian, but then I thought that sounded arrogant, and I stopped halfway through the word.
Okay.
You want to elaborate on that?
Yes.
Nice.
So you start off the game clocking in at the giant department store, which name escapes me, and you start trying to get to the shoe department, and it's in the most ludicrous spot, down staircases and through elevators and past the clothing department and all this crazy stuff. And you finally get there, and there's this old lady in a shopping cart full of heavy boxes, and that's the first mystery of Distolf is, what are these odd boxes? There's weird things going on. You start uncovering a huge conspiracy that you would never expect. And, the really fun thing about this is the puzzles are light and fun and full of weird objects, which I always appreciate. Kind of Day of the Tentacle style, where you're like, oh, yeah, you do this weird thing with this thing and it works. But it's a lot easier since it's twine and you don't have to worry about what's clickable. There's also a great waiting mechanic where it'll show a sentence, pause a little bit, show the next sentence, pause a little bit. So when it's trying to say that, a teenager waiting for, the time to clock in, you just have to sit until the time on the clock changes to the next minute and you can punch in. So they really do a good job of timing. Yeah, exactly. They make you try to feel it by timing out the twine stuff, not letting you take a next step. So very lighthearted, silly, but I played it all the way to the end. I really enjoyed it, and it is the kind of conspiracy theory that if you were 15, you might think up. You're like, oh yeah, and this is all happening, and then this happening, and it just kind of spirals out of control. So although I would never, if this was in a movie, it would definitely be like a Disney Channel movie because the plot goes completely off the rails, but it's so appropriate to the genre that I was in.
That's awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Definitely. And I think a lot of it's just kind of dealing with the next surreal thing down the pipeline.
Well, the first game I did was not a lot of fun. And that is what the game is trying to do. It's called All I Do Is Dream, and it's by Megan Stevens. And the little tagline I keep throwing out there for this is like, Depression the game. It's a very short, maybe
that's a great title. Save that one for next year's IFComp.
Yeah, right. And that might not be entirely right, but that's how I felt playing this game. It's maybe 15 to 20 minutes long. I'm okay. I've recovered by playing the other game that I played, which I'll talk about later. It's maybe 15 to 20 minutes long. It's a twine game. And so I played it entirely in the browser. It was great, simple. It is all about its prose. It is very nicely written. You play as a person whose girlfriend has gone to work. She works the night shift, so you are home alone for the evening. And it's what you're going to do with yourself. But it's really hard to find motivation to do anything. There's dirty dishes. There's a curtain that is stained and should be washed. There's a closet that is overflowing that you've been working for weeks to clean out. But, it just, these tasks are insurmountable, and it's a lot easier if you just don't do them and you just sleep and pretend like it's not a problem. And it's what a lot of the game is. It's you as a player attempting to do these tasks and being bogged down by the enormity of them or the pressure of them or your own feelings of inability to do them well. And so you give up. And so for a game like this, because it's so short, I thought it was best to actually just read a little bit of it. just a little page of it because I think it's really nice and gives you an idea of what it's all about. So at this point, you're trying to clean the closet. You're good at pushing things mostly because you have to push yourself to do anything, whether it's brushing your hair or getting a drink of water or going swimming with Evie. For that reason, you're good at pushing everything back in the closet. Winter coats that don't fit, back in. Books you'll never read, back in. Birthday cards that may or may not have writing in them, back in. And it's little blurbs like that as you try to do day-to-day things, but the pressure or the weight of, frankly, depression is what it feels like, stop you, and you realize that just going back to sleep might be the only thing that you actually can do. So obviously, I really recommend it. I mean, you know, it's sad, but it's something that I think the written word accomplishes better than anything else. And writing like this and having the interaction that you do, because, you know, it's kind of a game. It's like, what do you want to do? Should I try to do the dishes? And you're like, okay, I'll do the dishes. And then, like, you know, you're not able to do the dishes because it's too much and you just need to sit down for a while. And okay, well, fine. What else do you want to try to do? Well, you could clean the windows. You could go to the closet. You could try to take a nap. You know, you get the choice, but ultimately it's just, you know, you can't do anything. It's sad, but I really enjoyed it. I think it's worth checking out.
Cool.
Well, I played a game called Sigil Reader Field by Verity Virtue. And this one, I really like the concept here. So I'll just kind of explain the world of the game, and then I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of how it plays. So the blurb on the IFComp page is, I am a sigil reader. I work in a city where sigils are a matter of public health. For a maliciously inscribed sigil could mean the ruin of a business or a soul. Except today I wake to a changed world. The sigils are distorted, and the station is silent. I fear I am responsible. A short parser game about exploration, loss, and restoration. So good lead-in, right? And that's a cool concept. I always like this sort of blending of sort of real themes, or reality, and the sort of magical world or magical realism kind of themes. This is a game where you are playing as a sigil reader who awakens in a police station where you work. I think it's a police station anyway. And it's deserted, and something has clearly gone terribly wrong. And it plays a little bit like a walking simulator, quote unquote. So you're kind of exploring the station, finding objects, picking them up, examining them. Every time you pick up an object, you get a little blurb of text about what it is that your character thinks about it. There's also a remember command that's kind of like, I played some other, I'm struggling to remember which I'm thinking of at the moment now, but remember just lets you put in a name or the name of an object and try to remember things about it. And your character seems to be suffering from some mild amnesia. So sometimes you're able to remember and sometimes you're not. And sometimes if you try to remember multiple times, you might remember different things. Now that's a really cool idea. And I was pretty engrossed in it at first. I have to say this was a little bit unpolished. I feel like it maybe just isn't quite ready yet. Because I really like the concept, and a lot of the prose was pretty interesting and involving. But first off, there were some limitations with just sort of, like, for example, the remember command very often just returned nothing at all. Like, it had a standard response, I don't remember exactly how it was phrased, that basically meant, I can't think of anything, nothing comes to mind, that kind of thing. And even when you would try to remember something that seemed like a very concrete thing that you should at least be able to get some kind of text about, nothing at all. So while the remember command seemed like a really cool concept, it rarely worked the way I expected it to, even in situations where it really seemed like I was supposed to try to remember something. Sometimes it wouldn't work. Also, I wasn't able to complete it without a walkthrough. I did a lot of sort of wandering around the police station and trying to find, stuff. And there's a lot of very evocative, cool stuff. For example, you start remembering a lot of things about your colleagues, some of whom, or maybe all of whom, seem to be dead. And there's a lot of text that kind of indicates that you feel responsible for that. And there's a lot of hints about, I can't remember the name now, but like a serial killer or a slasher that you're starting to remember things about. And so that's very ominous, right? And I won't spoil the ending or anything, but I couldn't figure out how to progress the game after a certain point. I had explored all of the rooms. I had thought I had found everything. The way it appears to work is there's sort of an under-the-hood score based on what you've interacted with that kind of builds up to a certain point. So it's kind of like if you were playing Gone Home and after you'd picked up X number of objects, you maxed out a score, right? And
it's not by what you've discovered; it's by
the
amount of things you've played with.
Well, the walkthrough of it kind of indicated that, and I may be getting a kind of a simplified view of that, so I'm not really sure. I obviously haven't looked at the code or anything, but it seems to be that after you've reached a certain point, then of you've explored everything, then there's a new avenue open to you, but it's not an obvious one. It's not like I've discovered a locked door and now I can open that door. It's more just like, once you've progressed past a certain amount of exploration, then you can go out the front door. Now, so I have to say, like, in terms of just the game mechanics and everything, this feels pretty unpolished, but it feels really promising because of the really cool setting and the cool theming and everything. I'm totally into it, except I don't think it's as polished as some of the other stuff I've played for this year's IFComp. So I really want to like this. I don't necessarily, so I definitely recommend giving it a try. I'm not probably going to have it like top of my list, but it's a very promising piece. It just seems like maybe it's like an early draft or something.
I think it's interesting to think about and kind of point out the varying levels of polish on some of these games, and it makes me wonder, without really knowing too much about like the kind of like clout behind the IFComp or like its history, is like clearly some of these are like completed works. And from time to time, some of them feel like maybe they're not done.
And part of that's the charm of the IFComp. I mean, there's a set time limit. You have to submit your game by X date, and a lot of the time you do get things that are like early versions of works that'll later be refined and released in a more polished form later. And that's okay. Like I still think there's a lot of value in playing these games as a part of kind of getting a pulse of interactive fiction and the scene as it stands. So, even if there are some games here that are, early versions of works or are unpolished, or they might be the first work by a particular author, or, just that's there's still a lot of value in playing these games and getting a sense of, the whole scope of interactive fiction as a scene.
That said, I will say that the majority of rating systems, when I've looked at people, do include polish as one of the major criterias. Like, you can't really get above a certain point on a 0 to 10 scale or 1 to 10 scale. You can't really get above a 5 if you have a lot of bugs, because they consider the game kind of unplayable. And I will say that I've looked at a couple things that I thought were interesting, did a quick search, and people said it was buggy. I didn't attempt it because I knew that I'd rather spend my time. There's a difference between things that are unpolished, though, and things that are going to have game-breaking bugs. And I think like any game we play on Short Game, we'll kind of tolerate some bugs if it's okay. Like, I remember To the Moon, like, getting stuck on a horse in a corner.
Oh, good God.
Yeah, that was...
But that's not what 99% of the time when I remember To the Moon, I'm not thinking about that horse. So, a typo
I've
here and
never
there.
forgotten that horse.
I will never forget that horse, but it's not the first thing that comes to mind. Mm-hmm. And a typo here and there I will completely excuse, but if the rhythm or the feel is off, or if I think it just falls apart at the end, or if I can't accomplish what I want to, I'll think that's kind of a deal breaker. That's my personal one. Like, if there's a word missing in a typo, because in Twine you click something and the word disappears, that's just a bug, and I'll kind of accept it.
Yeah, a little bug here and there doesn't bother me at all. And like I said, with this particular game with Sigil Reader Field, I was so into the theme and setting and even a lot of the writing that like I'll forgive any level of kind of lack of polish. I would just say that like this one is one that I feel like it would benefit from a second draft or some updates and maybe some expansion. And I would really like to check out what this game looks like in a little bit. But I don't think it's like top of my list this comp.
Yeah, totally reasonable.
So Nate, what did you play?
So for my second game, way more lighthearted than the other one, I played a game called How to Win at Rock, Paper, Scissors, which I think is a great title. It had me right out of the gates. I was excited to give it a try. It's a parser game.
And we should say the author's names. That's by Brian Quack?
Quack?
Kwak. I hope I'm getting that right.
Quack.
I have to imagine it's Quack.
Quack. You're probably right. Not Quack.
Quack or
Excuse
Quack?
me. Apologies to Brian.
Sorry, Brian. He's been dealing with it his whole life.
I'm sure.
Yeah, ducks following him everywhere.
Yeah. It's a parser game. It's a little, I like pretty, from my experience, pretty standard parser game. You know, you're in an environment. You can go north, south, east, west. You can look, you can examine, you can pick up. But in this game, you are coming back to a rock, paper, scissors tournament that you seem to have lost in the past. Only this year, it's going to be different. This year, you're going to win because this year, you are going to properly pray to the gods.
Oh, I did not expect that to be the end of the sentence.
It's I'm not done, but I am loving this game. So it's you start out by finding out like really early on. A guy like goes out for a fist bump and you're able to play paper. At any moment in the game, you can play rock, paper, or scissors as your parser input, and you will play that thing. And a guy goes in like for a fist bump and you play paper and he gets sucked into a vortex. And you gain 1 point.
Your poor fist bumping friend.
It's actually a friend. It's like straight up a friend, and the game kind of forces you to play paper and suck him into the vortex, which is a learning moment for how the game is going to kind of, go or behave going forward. It's one of the first things you do, and it's just so funny. And so again, I haven't completed it, but where I am right now is in the process of finding a rock, a piece of paper, and a pair of scissors to place upon my altar to properly pray to the gods. I have found the rock and I have found the paper. Working on finding the scissors.
Have you checked your desk?
I haven't. So your locker is where your altar is, and I got the paper from a flyer, and there's other students, and you're walking. It's all on it's all in like a campus. So you're walking around. It's very standard. Like you are in the quad. To the north is a library. To the east is the dorm. To the south is the gym, which is where the rock, paper, scissors competition will be held. To the west is like a parking lot. And a couple times I have duped people into accidentally putting out their hands in things that represent rock, paper, scissors, and I've sucked them into the vortex. It's really funny. It's not. I'm not super experienced with this stuff, so I've had a little bit of a hard time finding these.
I'm very curious how your
objects.
player character managed to survive his past attempts at this tournament. If this vortex is always hungry for rock, paper, scissors losers.
Must be by the will of the gods.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm anxious to finish it. I'm maybe a half hour, 45 minutes into it, and I think unless it opens up a ton after finding the three pieces for the altar, I'm assuming you enter into some sort of rock, paper, scissors tournament, which is really why I picked it up in the first place. I was like, I like rock, paper, scissors. I could go for a parser game where I'm just
This strategic game is right up my alley. So.
Yeah, well, I did a World of Cards tournament last time, and so I thought I'd pick another, game within a game this time, and It's better than I was expecting in that this otherworldly notion I did not see coming, and I again I haven't finished it, but so far it has my recommendation.
That sounds really funny. I really want to
wholeheartedly.
give that a try.
Yeah. Well, and there's not a lot of jokes. There's not like set them up, knock them down, but it's just like the situation is really funny.
That's awesome. It's sort of like absurd humor like that IF sometimes does better than you could really do in any other style of video game.
Definitely.
And that's actually a kind of a good transition to the next game I played, which is a bit of an interactive fiction in-joke. So I played a game called Take by Amelia Pinola. And this is a parser game. And if you've played parser games, you know that there's a sort of standard set of commands. So, the standard stuff, navigation, north, south, east, west sort of thing. Take lamp, put lamp on bench, that kind of thing. Well, in this game, apart from the very basics that you absolutely need, like look and movement, you're limited to only one verb, and that is take. And I do fear to kind of give away, because the game is described when you boot it up as one joke until expiration by Amelia Pinola. And it is kind of a singular interactive fiction joke that if you don't want the joke spoiled for you, perhaps skip forward. But I have to say that this game has a high recommendation from me. So here it is, and I'm going to be giving away a little bit of the joke, but the joke is one that you figure out within the first move or two of the game. So I don't think that it's going to ruin the experience for you. So take, in this case, does not mean get item and put it into your inventory, as it does in every other interactive fiction game that I have ever played. Take, in this case, means take in the sense of a hot take. It means write some content about the object that you are naming. And you play as some sort of futuristic gladiator who, so the description says, you are battle weary, your armor is scanty, and your countenance is loathsome. You tire of the swords flicking at your neck, but you have a duty. There is nothing you can't take. And so you are a gladiator who seems to fight entirely by writing withering takedowns of the things that she sees around her.
Are you a social justice warrior?
I suppose one could argue for that. And just a couple.
I love a good hot take.
I know. And so just to give you a couple quick examples of what that looks like in game, like just in the very first scene, you're dropped into like your gladiatorial barracks and you're waiting for your opponent to appear. And you are without a weapon, but there are many objects around you that you can take. They are all yours for the taking. And so, for example, you might say, take potion. You write about the act of quaffing a potion in public, what it says about you, what personal secrets you exhale with every sip. Taken. Take shield. You write a comprehensive guide to shield use in battle. It's meant for defenders like you, but attackers will see it as well. It's more for readers. You can't care. Taken. And the game's plot, because you're limited to only taking things, meaning like only writing about what you're seeing, the game's story progresses more or less regardless of what you do. You're there to observe and write withering takedowns, and even when battle commences, you're pretty much just an observer of the story. And but like you can take anything. The author has done a great job of kind of having a one or two sentence take about anything you can possibly name in the scene. It's not a long game. I'd say maybe 20, 30 minutes. But it has a very high recommendation from me for doing. Now, I don't know if this joke would necessarily work for anyone who isn't interested in and already pretty familiar with the, world of IF, because like the reason this take thing worked is that it's playing on take as a standard IF command in a parser game. But I found it really amusing, and it was funny throughout and interesting and a little bit thoughtful. And there's a bit of a twist at the end that I thought was particularly neat that I won't spoil here. But when you finish the game, make sure to read the text that you would normally see at the end of the game, where you'd see like reset or what have you. Make sure to read that text, because there's an interesting option there that led to another interesting twist at the end. So definitely play this game if you are into IF and I don't know if I have a better way to explain it than
And
that.
hot takes.
Yeah, if you're into hot takes.
So I think that's a good point because it's definitely meta to interactive fiction, but the concept of like the hot take is so ubiquitous at this point to anyone who follows anything media wise. Everyone's looking for like if you're on Twitter, you're aware of what like a take is. So I think it's maybe a little bit more broad than just people who are looking for like a meta interactive fiction jokes, but it definitely I think you're benefited by accepting
sure.
or at least laughing about it on both sides.
Yeah, realizing that take did not mean take here was like, I laughed out loud when I realized what it was doing with that command. And then it managed to play that single joke through the whole game and still be amusing and interesting with it throughout. So A+ on that.
Glad you're here to give us your, quick thoughts on this game.
Let me create some personalized content for you.
So, based on your kind of experience as a hot take gladiator,
I consider myself a hot take gladiator.
yeah, I think we
Aren't we all in this
aspire
day
to
and
that.
age?
The Skull Embroidery is a game by Geron Pariso. You're also a warrior of sorts, and I was really drawn to this game because it's a genre that feels very classic IF to me, and it's a pure dungeon crawl. And the neat thing about this game, the name, the Skull Embroidery, comes from your main character, who is a waking, with amnesia, how classic, in the middle of a forest, having just fallen off of his giant bat, who is
As
dead
you do
in the tree branches above you, and you're dressed in a creepy robe with some skull embroidery. And so obviously there's the question of what necro cult do I belong to? But the
Standard next question.
Yeah, the play of the game is actually really crunchy for IF, incredibly crunchy for parser IF, and there's some interesting
Define
shortcuts.
crunchy.
When I say crunchy, I mean that there are a lot of interacting systems going on.
Like
There's
Nimber Crunchy.
a lot of rules involved, a lot of so your actions at any given time are very simple, but every action is playing off of all these various different systems. So, like, just to name a few, it has a hunger system, it has craftable items, it has an action point based combat system where you can learn different new moves for both attack and defense. There's a whole lot going on. There, of course, there's NPCs you can interact with. There's a complexity to the inspection of your environment that is above and beyond what you usually would see in a game like this, where every time you pass through a room or look and inspect a room, which again uses action points, wastes time and makes you hungry. Every time you do that, you have a chance of finding more and more hidden objects. There are things that won't reveal themselves to you on first glance or even maybe 10th glance in a room. My first experience with the game was a little bit brutal, because I basically fought a beetle for a long time and then it killed me. And then I tried again and I fought a beetle for a really long time, and then I ate a mushroom and that killed me. But it didn't kill me fast. It poisoned me.
Of course.
Dealing me 2 damage like every second or whatever. And so I thought, oh, surely this poison will wear off.
Oh, no.
But it did not, and eventually I died after having done a little bit of exploring. And I'm still working my way through the game, very, very early in the stages of this game. Mainly my exploration of the game at this point is about learning how the various systems work. One thing I will say for the game is that for something that's purely text-based, it has some, and has so much going on, it has a really nice affordance for usability in that at any given moment, you have a list of all the different things you can do, and how many action points they cost. And although many of them are things you can do that are complex, like, there's various different kinds of attacks, when you do an attack, you then get to pick from a second kind of sub list. So, to do a punch might be to hit A and then hit 1, and you can inspect yourself and get a lot of various stats, and you have a current, like a status sheet that's as complex as any character sheet in any RPG.
Sounds like there's just a ton of mechanics.
Yes.
That's pretty cool for a text-based game to be able to balance all that, because I think normally you would have some sort of HUD, right, or like some sort of menu or something where you could see all this stuff displayed.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds as complicated as King of Dragon Pass, but a lot more open to what you're doing, because you can actually click on the buttons and see how it's going to affect things.
Yeah, I'm kind of just getting to the point in it where I'm kind of feeling like I've got my hands around the systems of the game, and I'm sure it's going to expand out way past what's going on. But it does seem like a unique game. It's a text-based dungeon crawl, and I thought I had seen that before, but I hadn't seen it like this.
Cool.
Yeah, this looks. Wow. And looking at all the information about this, it looks pretty deep. I just glanced at the walkthrough, which is included on the IFComp page. I didn't really read through it because I may play this and don't want everything spoiled for me, but it looks like almost as in-depth as your average, like a small GameFAQ. And it looks like this game is built in Ruby, so like he decided to build this from scratch himself rather than build it based on an existing system like Twine or Inform. So looks like
if I had one hesitation about this game, it was the fact that I had to run it in the terminal on my Mac, and I was like, I wonder what access this command line program has to my files, but
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah, I nothing bad happened. So you
if this game eats your hard drive, do not blame us, please.
I mean, the feature list on this was insane. I read the description and saw the features, and then it said you have to install some gems. I was like, of course, every one of these features is. You're not going to get that out of the box on anything. Like, no one has a hunger system and a way to level up. That's not built in Twine.
No way.
Awesome.
Why would it be?
Why isn't it?
Well, that's really cool.
One of the things that I think, this is very clearly an implementation of a RPG system in an IF game, to the extent where a lot of the things are dealing, when it talks about damage, it talks about it in terms of weapon dice, like a D6 or a D8. And, there's things like critical hits and things like that. So it's definitely I felt at home as a D&D player in this game.
That's really cool.
Well, I know that Nate's tournament game was very kind of Hearthstone card-based. So it's interesting that there's multiple games this year trying to map other types of games directly onto IF. Last year I played some of the Baker of Shireton, but that was kind of parroting an RPG. It was as if you were actually an MMO. It was as if you were a baker in an MMO and players were coming in and out and you could break free. Very complicated. But I find it interesting that people are kind of poking at the boundaries of how complicated something can be in words before it ceases to make any sense.
Well, IF has always been like a kind of had a symbiotic relationship with other game styles. A lot of really cool ideas for game design and game narrative originate in interactive fiction and then make their way into other styles of games. I mean, look at the entire, quote unquote, walking simulator genre, which I think you can really draw direct lines back to a lot of earlier work in interactive fiction. But the same thing happens in reverse all the time. So, and obviously, like, interactive fiction is kind of born out of the tabletop RPG You look back at things like Adventure, but it still draws a lot of its inspiration from other video games and also from, other literature and things like that. It's always cool to see that happen.
This Skull Embroidery, Reagan, this walkthrough is no walkthrough at all. It's literally just an explanation of how like combat works and stuff. Like I have no clue how large or small this game is, but it's certainly complex, and he's got it built out to the point where it could be infinite in size. God knows.
So last but not least, I played Stone Harbor by Liza Daly, probably, while we're mispronouncing everyone's name. We do love our authors, even if we butcher your handles. Apologies. But the description of this game talked about you play this boardwalk psychic, and you are lying. It says, you're good at what you do. Tell tourists pretty lies about love, money, and life after death. That's what people want from a boardwalk psychic, and you deliver. And just the way that was phrased, I was kind of already in. I thought this was going to be a game about being a con. And then it said, the curtain is opening. So I thought maybe you're kind of getting into real stuff. It opens up, it's a hypertext game, which is a game where you get a single long story. By the end of the game, you could actually scroll all the way back up and read the whole thing. And you click on different links, and the text will expand or change depending on what you've pressed. So, for example, at the beginning, the first way they take this in is kind of a joke. You're reading for this tourist, and you're guessing names that start with N. So you're like, I'm seeing an N, and you click it. It's like Nancy, Ned, Nick. And he's like, Nick, my wife is... Nick is my father. And you're like, yes, Nick. So every time you click, the name changes. And what they do with that mechanic later is really interesting. So a detective comes in, and she's like, well, I was told to go find somebody. And you're like, oh, that was my mother. I took over her shop, and she's like, doesn't matter. She said you should have, there's this mystery happening, and I think you're completely full of it. And then she kind of throws something down on the table, and it's a glove. And it is... Suddenly you get this italicized, bold text. It's like an angry, frustrated glove. And then when you tap it, the language changes, and it gets, the description of the glove gets more intense and more intense. And then suddenly the entire screen is taken up by a full-width black and white image, and it has like a cover thing. And then you're in another memory. And when this happened, I kind of went, oh, you're a real psychic, and the way they kind of do visions is so immersive and beautiful. I was not expecting it. And it kind of took the game to a new level. The premise of this game is that you're a total bullshit psychic, except you can actually feel the emotions of objects if they're intense. So you can get back to an image, and the object like wants you to feel the way it's feeling. And it's that the objects we interact with that we have strong connections to start feeling a bit of our emotions. So like a doll might be frightened, not because the doll is scared, but because something scary is going to happen to its owner. Or I don't want to give too much of away, but it kind of gives this beautiful, melancholy, very empathetic feel to it. Meanwhile, you're just kind of this meaty boardwalk carnival guy, like never thought you'd be in this situation. And you start feeling a purpose. You start really going through the story. So I won't say that the mystery is the, Agatha Christie novel of the century. It's a pretty straightforward mystery. And you don't really make decisions except you decide what to kind of look at and the pacing. But I think it still feels very interactive, because when you choose to look at things, you choose to kind of dribble out information, things change. Like, you're describing how you found an object to a policeman, and every time you click a link, you give him a little bit more precise definition, and her face changes. So that's the type of interaction. It's clarifying, it's changing the rhythm of the game. And I think it's just a really short, lovely experience, deeper than you'd think. These flashbacks are all very meaningful because they're just such intense feelings. And you feel great sympathy for things like cigar cutters and houses, because that's what you end up connecting with in the story. And through it, you learn to kind of connect with people. I didn't expect this at all when I started reading it.
Wow, that sounds really cool.
I love narratives that have like stuff about carnivals or fortune tellers or things like that. That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, and it's nice to be a terrible psychic who actually has a little bit of real vision to it. It really deepens the character.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Guys, it's shaping up to be a great contest.
It really is. This year's IFComp is the biggest they've ever had, and some of these are some of the most interesting things I've seen in IFComp. We're going to probably be back with probably one more IFComp episode before the conclusion of...
We all got to get to 5.
Yeah, at the very least. What's the date of the conclusion of the contest? I should have it here handy, and I don't. Let me see if I can find it.
November 15th.
Thank you. So we'll probably be back with at least one more episode about other IFComp games before November 15th. And depending on how things go, we may either kind of reveal our choices and rankings that we're voting on then, or we may wait until after the results are released and talk about those results after the fact. But either way, we'll be coming back to you with more IFComp in a future episode. If you have particular things that you've seen in this year's IFComp that we haven't covered that you liked, or if you have opinions about the IFComp games for this year that you want to share with us, we're eager to hear that stuff. First, you can get in touch with us on Twitter. We're @_shortgame. Or you can email us at info@theshortgame.net, or there's a contact form on our website, www.theshortgame.net. Any of those are great ways to get in touch with us.
I would also throw out, just in the spirit of it, if you know of an interactive fiction game that you really, really enjoy, and you think it would be good for us to play or talk about or whatever, let us know. I mean, we do this every year, but obviously this is a deep and very long-standing genre. I think we would all love to hear of more just great interactive fiction games.
Absolutely, particularly if you think it's something that we would we should cover on the show as a full episode. So absolutely let us know what your favorite IF is. I've been your host, Reagan Kelly, and you can find me on Twitter @ReaganK. That's RayGank. Laura, where can people find you?
You can also find me on Twitter @LauraJNash.
Nate, where can people find you?
Also on Twitter @NateSTL.
And Shane, where can people find you?
On that Twitter @8bitshane.
And thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.